So that's why you tend to see kind of more antagonistic politics in that way. But in other parts of Westminster, I think genuinely, I saw it particularly with Labour MPs. I think I would see that they found it difficult. They're all socialising together, having a drink afterwards or whatever. I don't want to pretend we're best friends, but there is a way you kind of how politics works, and I'm sure that's true at local council level as well.
Well, people are people, aren't they? Regardless, in a way, of their beliefs, it should at some point better.
I mean, some quite horrific insults can be hurled at times, and I wish people would not go to that level of extreme. Quite often it can get a bit too personal, and then temperatures need to calm down a bit. But that's partly because the things that we do affect people, and so it can get very emotional. And people are obviously, that's a big driving force of people also getting involved in matters. So nevertheless, it's our job to kind of work that through with each other, but also to have those challenging conversations with our voters as well.
Is it having been in term for over one term of office now? Has it lived up to what you expected? Is it anything at all like you thought it would be?
It's actually better. I find that I have been able to do things for the constituency that I believe, just by the power of the portcullis, often it's about bringing people together within the constituency. So, and a good example is down in Felixstowe when we were having a situation, Premier Inn being built, it's now open, but trying to get a bit of a feeling for this seafront going along. And initially the PR agents of Premier Inn weren't playing ball. So I just wrote to the Chief Exec of Whitbread and expressed my disappointment. And 2 days later we had one of the directors at the meeting that had been rearranged. So that's where I think the power of an MP can come in, which, dare I say it, just as Joanna blogs, I wouldn't have that. But it's about using that kind of influence appropriately, and also, dare I say it's also about managing expectation. I don't pretend that I can just wave a wand and the solution will be found. So in that regard, I never anticipated going up to Westminster and then, expecting the Prime Minister to agree with every single word I said, or that somehow my experience of industry or life would necessarily be the main insight for everything that my party does. So it's having a balanced or a managed expectation of what was coming. But as I say, it's been better than I anticipated, and I think Parliament's got stronger in the last few years. We've seen that with the increase of select committees. I was on the select committee when the Murdochs came. Frankly, there aren't many other forums where you could bring some of the most powerful people in the world to account on behalf of voters.
That must have been quite amazing, because that was quite early on, wasn't it? I think in your term.
It was. I mean, and looking back, there were some things that I did well that day. There are other things I wish I could have done better. But that's also the thing about Parliament. It's a learning process. The slight difference, how can I put it, to being in a job is that your learning is done very much in public view. So, and that's to some extent perhaps, I'm not criticising the media at all, it's their job to hold politicians to account, and they largely do a good job of that. I think at times, sometimes a few things get a bit trivialised, but overall it's, dare I say, it's one of the challenges at times on why people feel politics has got a bit grey, because you are on constant display, and something, if I said something outrageous here today, I'm pretty sure it would be networked by the time of the 5 o'clock news bulletins around the country. So there's an element there about being slightly careful. That doesn't mean not being, complete vanilla, but just reminding yourself that everything you do as a politician is there for the public and for you to be held to account, and that's part of the role that you take on.
Yeah, and I guess that, you're very much in the public eye regardless, isn't it? Even when you're privately here and go to the pub and so on, and that must be, is that quite a drain in a way? Is that something you hadn't thought about maybe?
I think at first it's all quite nice, and after a while it's when people say, I know you're out for having a meal with your friends, and yes, you are out having a meal with your friends and you want to be accessible, but more often than not it's very rare that somebody approaches you with something quite an emergency. So that doesn't mean that I always will stop and speak to people, but usually I try and make it a short conversation and just say, this is the best way to get hold of me. and just say that you spoke to me on this, so that I, vividly remember. Only because one of the things is just about ensuring you have an appropriate work-life balance. It's one of the things I've stressed to both to our new MPs in Suffolk, but across the country from all parties. It's a very demanding place in Parliament. People feel that they can't switch off, and actually you just have to. You have to recharge your batteries, and that matters for your family as much as anything else. It's quite... nobody asks us to do this. We choose to do this role, and we choose to go to Westminster. And so, not looking for sympathy at all. It's a huge privilege, and it can be great fun. But there's a balancing act that you have to have with your family, and sometimes when you're in the thick of it, quite literally, it's too easy to forget that. But it's something the Prime Minister always stresses to new MPs, and every now and again we just need a reminder that ultimately the world isn't going to stop. It's going to continue without us, as it were. So the world's not going to stop because we jump off.
So, and has becoming a deputy leader of the House, I mean, that's quite a big role, isn't it? And has that sort of made that balance harder to deal with?
Well, it's got a quite significant role, but tends to be more behind the scenes. So and quite a lot of liaison with other parties, but also about preparing the next session of legislation, for which will be announced in the Queen's speech on the 18th of May. So you won't see me doing quite so many speeches or going around the country doing visits. It's quite a Parliament-focused role, but again, a lot of it is just about coordination. I mean, my predecessor, John Gummer, is well known. He was in government a lot, and I think the secret is just to be organised and being focused on what it is that you are going to do. Not going to be able to get to every single fate or every single opening or every single that, but recognising where you can add value and doing the bits that that you can prioritise, and then using the kind of the recesses a bit more to try and be a bit more relaxed. I still try and make sure I get round schools when I can, but I kind of, having been to every school, I don't feel the need to then do that every single Friday. Go back when there's a change of head teacher or something like that. And I have to admit, I do quite a lot now on the phone, having already made those kind of initial relationships and had those face-to-face meetings. Actually, instead of driving for an hour each way to James Paget Hospital to go and see the chief exec and the chairman, I don't need to do that quite so often. We can get through what we need to on half an hour phone call. So some of it is just about being more sensible, having, I say, already established relationships.
So the role as deputy leader of the House, that's sort of behind the scenes, lots of paperwork, is it?
Yes, it is. It's kind of read boxes on a daily basis, going through different bits of government legislation, different bits of policy, and feeding into that process. But it's, I say, it's quite different to, say, Ben's role as Health Minister or Matt's role in his role as Paymaster General. But nevertheless, it's kind of a part of keeping Parliament going. And as I enjoy it very much. The Prime Minister, when he asked me last May when I went in, he felt that I was a good person in the House of Commons and this role would suit me. I'd like to think that's been the case. And not, as I say, it's not just about focusing on my own party or my own government. It is about focusing on people right across the House. So even small things, going back to kind of almost hygiene issues of helping people who just want to vent about how difficult it is to find a flat or find an office or things like that. And it's just small things like that, but it is part of what makes Parliament tick. And I'm pleased to play that role, and happy to do it for as long as the Prime Minister wants me to.
Were you surprised? Did you know that was what he was going? It must be like going to see the headmaster.
Well, I must admit, I had been asked for a shortlist of 3, and that wasn't on my list, partly because in the last Parliament it had always been filled by a Liberal Democrat, and I hadn't really thought of the role. But my previous experience as a government whip was similar but quite different. So this is a broader role, I'd say, and I've really enjoyed it, especially the role in preparing the next Queen's speech and the legislation, because part of it is that Secretary of State, we have people like Theresa May, Sajid Javid, Jeremy Hunt come along, and they bid for pieces of legislation in front of our committee, and it's our job to interrogate them. It's a bit of a Star Chamber process.